So Alan Dulles, though, was subsequently fired after the Bay of Pigs, and so this was before Kennedy was assassinated. How would he have that kind of power to still pull something off when he's no longer with the CIA?
Well, look, Alan Dulles was no rogue. He was very connected to power. He and his brother essentially ran the private club, very influential in New York, the Council on Foreign Relations. He knew generals. He knew other people in the intelligence community very well. He knew the heads of state, and he knew the heads of corporations on Wall Street, in the oil industry. He and his brother had represented them for years as lawyers. They were head of Sullivan and Cromwell, which is the biggest law firm on Wall Street. So, Alan Dulles would have acted with a consensus in mind. He had a feeling that the consensus was that Kennedy was a threat to their power, essentially, and needed to be removed. So after Kennedy fires him, you're right, in 1961, after the disastrous CIA invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs, he goes home and he's depressed for a while because he's used to wielding great power, Dulles. But then all of the top people of the CIA come to his house in Georgetown in Washington and report to him as if he's still running the agency. They don't report to John McCone with the same sort of deference. He was a political appointee that Kennedy replaced Dulles with. John McCone was a Republican businessman from California. He didn't know the old boys network of the CIA, but Alan Dulles did. And people like Richard Helms, who later was head of the agency, James Angleton, who's head of counterintelligence, very powerful men, treated the old man, as they called him affectionately, Dulles, with great respect. And they continued to report to him at his home in Georgetown. I think Alan Dulles set up a government in exile against Kennedy.
Wow. What evidence do we have? So we say that, okay, we think that this was, well, do you know, or do you have a theory of who actually pulled the trigger, whose bullet was it that ended up hitting JFK and assassinating him?
Well, I believe we have to. The suspicion of the House Assassinations Committee in the 1970s and researchers like me fell on Bill Harvey, William Harvey, who was head of the CIA's assassination team. He himself was no rogue either. He was promoted. He was given great service, recommendations and evaluations by the CIA throughout his career. He was very loyal to Alan Dulles. To save him, because he'd fallen afoul of the Kennedys, they put him, the CIA, in Rome. He was head of the Rome station. And yet his deputy, Mark Wyatt, reported later that he spotted Bill Harvey, the head of the assassinations for the CIA, on a plane from Rome to Dallas before the assassination. I sued the CIA while I was doing my book, The Devil's Chessboard, for those travel records for Bill Harvey. I wanted the CIA to come clean. They wouldn't release those records. Those are some 4,000 documents that the CIA is still withholding illegally from the American people. They should have released those documents in 2017, according to JFK Records Act of 1992, but they've held on to them. They won't release Bill Harvey's travel records. What the hell was he doing in Dallas?
Why won't they release? So at this, is there any way to get these 4,000? Because as you mentioned, they were supposed to be released all by 2017, and they've held on. They did release a cache of them last year, or was it the year before that they released quite a few documents, but they've still held on to. I thought it was 3,000. You're saying it's 4,000 documents that they're still holding on to?
Close to 4,000 documents they're sitting on.
Okay.
Both President Trump and President Biden sided with the CIA and allowed them to withhold those documents.
Can you blame them? I mean, if the CIA took out a sitting president, and these guys are sitting presidents, they realize that the powers that be can do the same thing to them. I mean, what do you think it was that caused or is causing them to withhold those documents? What would be their motivation?
Look, 50 years later, Kim, let's be honest. They could come clean. the American establishment, the media, the government. They went along with this terrible crime and the cover-up for 6 decades. The New York Times, which endorsed the Warren Commission, the Warren Report, which is a lot of hooey, as we know, based on a magic bullet that did not exist, according to Paul Landis, the former Secret Service agent, who recently wrote a memoir about this. He found the magic bullet on the back seat of the presidential limousine, not on a hospital stretcher. It did not cause 7 entry and exit wounds in President Kennedy and Governor Connolly that day. That's a lot of hooey. We knew was hooey, but he has finally embraced this and reported on this, I think, very important discovery in the last month or so. So, look, 6 years later, they could come clean, but they're not. The New York Times asked me to write an article, an op-ed piece 2 weeks ago about the assassination. I was very measured. I was nicer to the New York Times than I should have been. It went up the ladder, the chain of command at the New York Times, and they spiked it. They still, to this day, they will not run anything about the assassination one way or the other. They didn't run anything about the assassination on the 60th anniversary last week, the New York Times. So the newspapers, the authorities that we expect to be authoritative, continue to cover up this terrible crime. And I think the erosion of faith that's led to the so-called conspiracy culture began in Dallas 60 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm sure a lot of people suspected that the government did this, couldn't ever really prove it because, of course, the government has the ability to cover up their own crimes. And with Alan Dulles, right? I mean, he ended up being part of the investigation. So if this guy is in charge of it and he's investigating himself, what is he going to do? Say, "Oh, I did it. It was me. All the evidence leads to me." No, of course not, right? Of course not.
No,
Um,
he used his position on the Warren Commission to come clean. He covered up the crime instead.
yeah,
How he
of
got
course.
himself conveniently appointed to the Warren Commission is another story.
Um, so, what evidence do we have at this point that shows us? We don't have those 4,000 suspicious. Well, first, let me follow up on the 4,000 documents, the nearly 4,000 documents. Is there a way to get them? Are there any lawsuits right now that are in play that are trying to get these 4,000 documents that you know of?
Yes, 2 friends and colleagues of mine have sued the Biden administration, trying to release those records, force them to release those records, abide by the law, the 1992 Act, the JFK Records Act, and release those documents unredacted and in full. The Kennedy campaign, Bobby Kennedy Jr., he has called for the government to also come clean and release those records. So I think it takes public pressure. It took the JFK film in 1991, Oliver Stone's film, to cause a public uproar to even get the Congress to pass that act the next year, the JFK Records Act. So I think public pressure could force Biden to release these records. And hopefully the lawsuit and public pressure will do that.
Yeah. So before we get into the evidence that we do have, I mean, just imagine what the consequence would be. So I know it's been 60 years and they could come clean, but if they did come clean and they said, yeah, the CIA killed our own sitting president, what would that? I mean, imagine what that would do to public trust in the CIA. It just seems to me like that would be the end of the CIA. That the public would hopefully, ideally, be in an uproar. I would hope that the public would say this is outrageous, and rise up and actually want to have maybe an end to the CIA. And maybe that's why they're not wanting to release these 4,000 documents. They don't want to end the CIA. Do you think that's why they're holding back?
Well, exactly. I think that's what they're afraid of. They're afraid that the public will be so outraged by this, they'll demand an end to the CIA. President Kennedy, after the disaster, the Bay of Pigs disaster in 1991, wanted to splinter, this is an exact quote, splinter the CIA. He was so angry at them, into 1,000 pieces and scattered to the wind. He had his aide, Arthur Schlesinger, look into how you could reorganize the CIA after after that crisis over Cuba. Schlesinger came back to him and said, by the way, let's rename the CIA. Let's, reorient it and put it under your control, more democratic control. Unfortunately, President Kennedy did not go forward with that plan. So there is some precedent for this as well. I think the CIA, if the truth came out about President Kennedy in Dallas, would be under enormous public pressure. And at that point, we may need a new intelligence agency. The CIA, for over the years, with so little congressional oversight, so little legal oversight, has committed one crime after the next. Not just the assassination of President Kennedy, but overthrowing governments overseas, assassinating foreign leaders. The CIA has a lot of dark history. And I think it may be time for us to establish a new intelligence agency, which President Truman, by the way, wanted. He wanted the CIA not to act, quote, as a Gestapo. He wanted them just to simply collate information
Right,
that a
right.
president needs, that foreign governments and foreign leaders.
Yeah, and that's what makes sense to me, is to say we have to get rid of the operative side of the CIA. They can't have these operations and assassins and dark ops people. I mean, they need to just be collecting intelligence. That's what their scope of them should be. And then with that intelligence, then there needs to be an actual checks and balances system before making decisions. Can't just go around offing leaders, and particularly our own, but really any leaders around the world. It's egregious to do that to any country, especially the ones that are elected by the people. It's atrocious. Let me tell you about our sponsor, Relief Band. Now, I wear this. I really, really like it a lot. It's been the best thing for me when it comes to nauseousness, which I get really bad motion sickness. I've had motion sickness since I was a kid. I've tried everything to get rid of the nauseousness when I'm driving in a car, when I'm a passenger in a car, when I'm on a roller coaster, when I'm on a boat. I cannot get on a boat without wearing my Relief Band. Relief Band is the #1 FDA-cleared anti-nausea wristband that has been clinically proven to quickly relieve and effectively prevent nauseousness and vomiting associated with motion sickness, anxiety, migraines, hangovers, morning sickness, chemotherapy, and much more. And now you can also use your HSA and FSA dollars to get a Relief Band. And it's really cool. You just wear it, and then you can change the frequency, and it kind of gives you a little buzz. It doesn't hurt. Don't be afraid of it, but it really does help with the nauseousness. It is the only thing that works for me. I have 2 of them. I keep them on hand whenever I'm going to get into a car as a passenger, but certainly on boats, I absolutely have to wear this. So whether you need everyday nausea relief, or you just need the occasional cure like I do from nausea, their patented technology makes feeling sick a thing of the past. And right now, Relief Band is running their 12 days of relief sale. So head over to reliefband.com for new discounts every day through December 12th. That's RELIEFBAND.com. That's reliefband.com for new discounts every day through December 12th.